build on the assets of this country. And two of those assets are youth and women. And there is a lot of debate, of course, on the demographic, generally speaking, the demographic dividend and the, I think, not idle, but somewhat of a boast that India will remain young for a very long time to come, younger than most countries, and as such, that will remain a competitive advantage, whether for a traditional model of development or for an Indian model of development, which is still to unfold. So with those few words of introduction, let me welcome all of you and especially the distinguished panelists on the dais. And I will start by asking Poonam Matrejia to start us off. As I see, she has her PowerPoint all set up anyway. So Poonam, go for it. So we want to have a good conversation as well. So about 10 minutes.
Delighted to be here, and thank you, Sudarshan, for having invited us and the panel. Why is the panel, why are demographics so important? We all know, but particularly in India, which is going through a fast transition, and the demographic dividend, which we haven't debated enough, I'd like to say. We need to debate more, and it's a time when it's not just young people, but the gender dividend and the silver dividend, we can make it instead of just a aging population that we feel we are saddled with. Second reason this conversation is very important, and Sudarshan, since you gave us the opportunity to talk about post-elections, the impact, the results that have come out, we also, all throughout, not only the last 10 years, increasingly 5 years, and in the last 5 weeks, we talked a lot about demographics, but we talked about it in a very divisive way. We didn't, some people talked about it in the most divisive way. And I strongly believe, and I want to say that upfront, that some of the divisiveness comes from numbers, but numbers that are wrongly quoted. Even though India has very rich demographic data, we still have made a mess of the data, and we have been not just spreading myths, misconceptions, but we have succeeded, I believe, in using the numbers wrongly, especially of one religion, by creating the divisiveness that we had. So the more we talk about demographics, the better. And I hope as a policy institute, you will be working much more on this because, again, no policies and programs, whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure, today we can talk about without looking at the changing demographics. Now, some people may say good news. We are the number one as of April last year. India is the most populous country in the world today. So according to the UN, India is the most populous country. I was asked by the health minister, how do you know? He didn't know till March. So I said, Indian demographic data, China's data, as well as the UN projections, which we've known for a long time. I'm only saying this to say that we are not very conscious of either the numbers or what our people need. So as per the census 2011, India's population at that point was 1.2 billion. It must be noted that the exact size of the country's population we won't know till the census is done. And we hope that there will be a census exercise after the new government is formed, now that we don't have to worry about the fact that we have numbers which are, the whole country is stabilizing, every religion is stabilizing in India. Um, so with over 65% of the population under the age 35, we are a young nation brimming with youthful energy, innovation, possibilities, and potential. And I see that on campus here. And I think of the number of you who are going to go into looking for jobs, possibly you're privileged, but a large number in this country, the number is too big to deal with between age 10 and 24. So education, health, skilling, job opportunities are things we have to keep in mind other than infrastructure for health, infrastructure for education, and infrastructure for jobs. Our demographic dividend does present us with a distinct advantage, offering us unprecedented opportunities to propel our country to a new height, whether it's economic terms or social development. However, to fully realize this potential, we must take deliberate action. It is not automatic, and we could have a situation where there is a demographic disaster. The trends in Indian population growth, most of you would be aware, but it is good to, ये off कैसे हो जाता है? On है? So the decadal growth rate has been declining amongst, as I said earlier, all sections of society, although interstate, interregional differences and variations continue primarily due to variable outcomes for education, health, governance, nutrition, employment, and empowerment of women. This slide presents an overview of some of the recent projections on India's population trajectory. According to the technical group on population projections formed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, India's population is projected to reach 1.5 billion by 2036. Another study by the Institute of Health Metrics Evaluation, University of Washington, published in the Lancet, predicted that India's population may peak at 1.6 billion by 2048, which is in close alignment with the long-term goals of Indian objective, which aims to attain a stable population by 2045. The same study also indicated that India's population will start declining after 2048 and come down to 1.1 billion by the year 2100. The UN population projections report in 2019 had projected India's population would peak at 1.7 billion by 2036. So we do have time. We have another 20 to 30 years in terms of window of opportunity, depending on which state we are talking about. And the trends in fertility, as we can see from this slide, rates are impacted by factors of place of residence, income levels, and women's education. Those living in rural areas have higher TFR than those living in urban regions. In fact, women's education and income play a key role in determining the TFR as the level of education increases. Globally, there is evidence that TFR decreases. Though recently you would have seen in the media, we had a report by the Prime Minister's Advisory Council. We have a former member here. I'm sure you've read the report and seen that the report concluded that because India's Muslim population is thriving, the population has increased. And that is something that the whole world and India doesn't have any evidence to show. There's irrefutable evidence, in fact, to suggest that there is a substantial fertility decline in all the major religious communities in India, and this is something I want to reiterate again and again. There is no evidence to show that communities have large families because of their religions, religious reasons, or an approach to life. Rather, these seem to be determined by other factors, economic factors, issues of poverty, marginalization, to name a few. Key concerns and challenges around the population clearly are gender inequality, state-regional disparities, limited window of opportunity for the dividend, and of course, lack of labor force participation of women, high unmet need, and lack of engagement in male engagement in family planning. I don't know how many people know that India, until recently, a decade ago, our unmet need for population was 18%, which means for family planning was 18%, which means people don't wish to have more children, but end up having more children either because women don't have agency, education, or access to family planning services. And of course, male engagement and responsibilities totally missing, not just where it comes to participation in family planning, but as supportive partners, they are missing. As supportive partners in terms of childcare, Madhura talked about it this morning, and as did Bina, there is no responsibility, and that's something that we really, really need to work on changing. In fact, the organization I work for, Population Foundation of India, our big slogan is Desh Badlega Jab Mard Badlega. So we are doing a lot of work in that area, and it's not just about family planning. It's not a technical fix. It's a change of responsibility, partnership, etc. The way forward, differential policy approaches are needed. India states are at different stages of demographic transition. Policy intervention should be customized based on demographic stages each state is going through. So what is happening in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, we need very different strategies in Bihar and UP, and we have much to learn from Kerala and Tamil Nadu. But of course, that's something that, as was said earlier, it's a great example to learn from, not just the deviant, and we need to make other states deviants too, if that is how people want to look. So leveraging the demographic dividend, the country does need to invest in education and vocational training programs tailored for the needs of young people, young Indians, especially in sectors with high employment potential, such as technology. Healthcare itself is a great area to invest in, a potential area where women will also be helped because some of the caregiving role will go to professional organizations or professionally trained individuals. And the need to establish, we cannot go at the pace we are going. There are two economists from JNU, Jayati Ghosh and C.P. Chandrasekhar. They did a paper 20 years ago, which showed only 4% of the young in India have the skills to take advantage of even the job opportunities that exist, and now it's gone up to 6%. So I won't say too much about leveraging the gender dividend because we heard I can't match Madhura in her research, analysis, and recommendations, so I'm going to skip it, not while giving due importance, but since we've been through it in the morning, we need to invest in girls' secondary education, skill building, and their overall well-being. And, we need to overall meet the aspirations of both the women and young people. Their aspirations have changed, and their aspirations have changed due to a whole range of reasons, and they have expressed themselves in the voting patterns in the recent elections. So we need to understand the aspirations of young people. We need to understand the aspirations of women, which are, and if we don't, we'll do it at a huge risk to the country and them and ourselves. And addressing the myths and misconceptions, as I said earlier, related to population and fertility of various social religious groups also needs to be dealt with. I think I've finished my 10 minutes, and I will, hopefully there'll be questions.
Thanks very much, Poonam. You did great with time and with content. Wonderful stuff. Thank you. So we will move next to Abhinav from YP. Let's you take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yes, thank you so much, for having me here. So before I start, I try like I'll be putting one question in front of the audience today. How many of you believe that young people are the leaders of tomorrow? You can raise your hand. Okay, now another question. How many of you believe that young people are the leaders of today? So I see a lot of common hands also for both these questions. So the intention of asking this question was we need to build from the not from the scratch, but we need to build, we need to understand the diversity that India has. And there the needs and aspirations as also iterated by Poonam on this platform, that the needs of young people are really very diverse. Sometimes it is difficult to actually understand or comprehend those needs based on the data that is analyzed by the government of India or other parallel institutions or multilateral institutions. So we need to go deeper and understand the values, understand the life, what young people lead on ground. So in order to do so, and it is not very like surprising data for us also. Last year, we did a very large scale data collection and we partnered with a coalition called the PMNCH, which is the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. And it was a campaign that that they organized or coordinated globally. It was known as the 1.8 billion Young People for Change campaign. 1.8 billion because that time it was 1.8 billion adolescents and young people in the world. So we partnered with them. We went on ground to understand the lived realities of young people. And in that process, we found and we reached out to more than 50,000 young people in the age of 15 to 24. And we found out that the needs are really very, like, we can also relate to those needs to the existing data that we have. So the the 3 points that stood out, the 3 demands from young people, and the question was just simple that we asked them, what do you want for your own health and well-being? And the answer was, the top 3 answers that we received was, first of all, equality in jobs, employment opportunities. The second was quality education. And the third one was affordable and accessible healthcare services. So these were the top 3 demands from young people that we received. It was not surprising, and because this is something which is also reflected in a lot of data that we also found on on different platforms. However, we do know that India is the youngest country in the world now, with more than 365 million young people in the age of 15 to 29. I'll be focusing more on 15 to 29 age group because this is what National Youth Policy also says. So, and we have a lot of like reflections on National Youth Policy, how it is being implemented, what's the progress on that, because the draft was released in the year 2021. So one thing that we have also realized, because as an organization, the YP Foundation focuses mostly on the youth leadership aspects, particularly focusing on their sexual and reproductive health and rights, and why there is a need to have a rights-based approach in terms of implementation of a lot of programs. So we believe in the capacity building of young people in different like modalities. And apart from that, we also facilitate their participation in various dialogue platforms. So why there is a need for dialogue platform? And we also realize this because a lot of young people come to us and they also ask us the question. I need to ask the question to the government representative, or I need to ask the question to the particular decision maker that we have for the particular program. Because for adolescents specifically, there are a couple of programs which we all know, that Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram, that speaks about a lot of issues that young people or adolescents face. The other one is the school health and well-being program. So we often facilitate those conversations with the decision makers. We provide them those platforms. And one demand also came from those facilitated conversations was, uh, is there any institutionalized structure that we have where we can directly ask questions from these decision makers? So there was no answer to that particularly, although there have been a lot of consultative processes, a lot of dialogue platforms that were like facilitated from the government's end. We have also seen in the recent G20 meetings, there were parallel Y20 engagement area as well. However, were these consultative processes meaningful for young people to have their words in the policy making or policy designing spaces? So that was the question that everybody asked in those platforms. So, so we do not have such an institutionalized structure. And we also heard it from one of the panelists, like who was there from Niti Aayog, and they also shared that this is something that we will take this forward in terms of how we can ensure young people have a consultative process or give feedback to our own programs. Because on ground, how it is being implemented, there are a lot of challenges. I'm not getting into the implementation aspects of many programs. So we need to have accountability in place, because the programs do have different mechanisms and which are present in the implementation guidelines. But those guidelines are actually not being implemented up to the mark in terms of how these spaces are being curated for different people to actually engage in. Because some of these processes, I can speak about different programs on RKSK program. There is a component of having district committee on adolescent health, state committee on adolescent health. But on ground, I have an experience of I have been engaged in different states, and those committees are not functional. Those committees have not been formed actually, although we do have those programs in place. So these are some of the challenges that we see on ground, and this is something we need to believe in. We need to understand the lived and the ground realities. And in addition to the already existing data that we have, in terms of employment opportunities, it is not we also feel that employment is something very, very important for young people to actually engage in. And everybody should have an employment, but the question is not how to get an employment, but how to actually retain that, how to sustain those employment opportunities for them. So that is also something we need to question from the government, from different agencies, that how are we making inclusive policies for the people, because there are a lot of challenges in terms of discrimination. So how we can facilitate those anti-discriminatory policies at the workplaces. We do have our interventions in Rajasthan. I can quote an example from there. We engage with the students from a couple of colleges in Rajasthan, and there were no such anti-sexual harassment policy in place. So we are also reviewing those policies for those colleges and actually trying to implement those policies in the college spaces. So these are some of the realities from the ground that we need to think about, and how we can actually collaborate with each other. It is not the question to question any particular department or any particular ministry as such, but we need to collaborate as a young people, and it has to be an intergenerational collaboration. And in addition to that, I would just like to make a last point over here and it was also iterated in the previous panel discussion as well, where it is important to have an interministerial, interdepartmental coordination, convergence on the ground. It is not only have a policy or a particular programs in place, but it is also important to have those kind of coordination among departments and how to engage actually young people in those processes as well, because they can be a very important asset for these programs as well, which are applicable for them. One last point over here was that I wanted to make, that we have always seen young people and women as beneficiaries of different programs, but now is the time to have them as equal stakeholders. So we have to come up with some of the strategies where we can involve them in all their capacities and harness their full potential in that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Abhinav. And now, yes, Santosh.
So first of all, thank you very much indeed, Sudarshan and Jindal University for inviting me back to Jindal. It's always a pleasure to be among very bright faculty and very bright students. So let me start by raising this question as to how do you define the demographic dividend? And that's what I'll begin with. A demographic dividend is defined as that period in the life of a nation in which the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependent population is falling. If the share of the working age population is rising, and that's what you're seeing here, all the way, the gray line is the 15 to 59, that's the working age population. That you can see is rising all the way until 2041. It goes up to 998, after which it begins to fall. You can see also that the orange line, 15 to 29-year-olds, that absolute number is also falling. Much earlier. What does this mean? That the demographic dividend is around for exactly another 15 years. It is not around after that, which means that we have to, if we are going to ride the wave of the demographic dividend, we have only 15 years to go, because this dividend has been around already for since the early 1980s, although I'm not capturing that. I think we have to establish this in your minds so that we begin to realize the urgency of all the actions that I'm going to be speaking about in this presentation, which I'm sorry to say, the vast majority of those actions the government is not taking. And that's what gives urgency to all the young people in this room, should give a sense of urgency to all the young people in this room, because you are the demographic dividend. If it's not realized in your lifetime, well before you turn 40, then you will have to bear the consequences of it, and so will your children and grandchildren. Let's move on. So what are the three major demographic groups for whom jobs have to be provided? Because these young people are joining the working age and they have to be provided jobs. Without that, there is no such thing as a dividend. That's the meaning of realizing the demographic dividend. What are the three groups? The first, farm landless and small and marginal farmers. We began by talking about these. Now, it's perfectly possible that, Jal Jangal Zameen approach can actually absorb many more people in agriculture in a productive way. Currently, that approach is not being adopted. I think we talked a little bit about that. I'll not have the time to go into that, but we still will need to pull millions of workers out of agriculture. And the fact of the matter is plot sizes are shrinking. There is no choice in the matter that workers will have to be pulled out of agriculture. That means new non-farm jobs have to be created. I will come back to this issue later. The second big group for whom jobs have to be created is the following: 15 to 29-year-olds who have gotten much better educated in the last 15 to 20 years. And their expectation is not to be in agriculture. They don't want to be in agriculture. I think Madhura talked about it earlier. Bina talked about it. We all know this. A subgroup within this, of course, is the girls. And it should be heartening for all of us that because elementary education was universalized, we also got upward pressure in secondary education. In 2010, secondary enrollment in our country was only 58%. In 5 years' time, by 2015, it had already gone to 80–85% with gender parity, which has never been achieved in a country at our level of per capita income. All these girls are looking for jobs. Be under no illusion that they want to get married. I could prove that with data, but I won't. The third group, of course, is the stock of unemployed. There were 10 million unemployed, only 10 million unemployed in 2012. That number had tripled by 2017-18. You will recall that in that first year after the PLFS was released, we learned that we had achieved the highest rate of open unemployment in the history of our country in 45 years. And since then, since 1718, we've had an increase in unpaid family labor, and that's what's making it seem as though the open unemployment rate has fallen. Now, these three groups, if we don't provide 10 to 12 million new non-farm jobs per year, we are not going to be able to realize the demographic dividend. We are being told, of course, day in and day out by economists like Surjit Bhalla of the government, that there has been job-full growth in the economy in the last 7 or 8 years, a subject I will come back to. So I'm going to be very brief about the overall takeaways because I do want to finish, in fact, in 20 minutes. I think we'll still have plenty of time for discussion after that. Actually, I won't talk about inequality, although inequality is very much connected to the fact that, jobs, non-farm jobs are not growing. These are subjects I will come back to. Therefore, let me just dwell a little bit on that last bullet. And that's why I mentioned Surjit Bhalla and Panagaria. And we've just had Amrish Dubey and Mr. Lavish Bhandari in recent newspaper articles talking about spreading the misinformation and the disinformation, unfortunately, which will allow the government to get away with a very, very serious, explaining away a very serious problem. They are spreading disinformation and misinformation, and I will turn to that now very quickly. I'm just going to summarize for your benefit what are the main summary points to emerge from the pre and post-COVID reality on jobs. It is actually quite stark. What are the main points? Firstly, this government, when it came to power 2014, inherited a 2.2% open unemployment rate, and the youth unemployment rate was only 6% in 2012. In 17-18, this open unemployment rate had tripled to 6.1, the highest in 45 years, and youth unemployment had also tripled, as I will demonstrate soon. Next, and this is very serious, structural change that was taking place between 2004 and 14, which is the period of 8%, nearly 8% growth, the fastest growth that our economy had experienced, was reversed. Not just stalled, but structural change was reversed, as I will proceed to demonstrate. The manufacturing share in GDP fell from 17%, which was the average it had been for a 25-year period till 2015, to 13% in the next 5 years. The share in employment after rising from 2012 when it was 10.5% to 12.8%, in 2017, it actually fell to 11.5%, and there's been an absolute fall in manufacturing employment. This is the exact opposite of what was supposed to be achieved by Make in India. The exact opposite. In other words, all the narrative was about Make in India, and what was happening was the reversal in structural change. Moving on, the share of agriculture in employment rose from 40% in 2018-19 to 42.5% in 19-20, with an absolute number of workers in agriculture, which had been falling for 15 years from 2004 to 19. Falling consistently, it had been rising until 2004, ever since 1947. After 2004, because non-farm jobs were being created at a rate of 7.5 million per annum, new non-farm jobs at the rate of 7.5 million per annum, thanks to the growth rate, workers were being pulled out of agriculture at an unprecedented rate. That stopped. It reversed. And it rose by 45 million. The number of workers rose by in absolute terms in 2019 by 45 million, another 7 million in 2011-12, an additional several million, adding 60 million workers to agriculture in a matter of 3 years. Yes, you heard me right. 60 million workers were added to agriculture. in a matter of 3 years. This was part of the reversal of structural change, a reversal of a process that had gone on for 15 years. The employment rate, which is the WPR, which is the share of the working age population finding work, fell from 43% in 16 to 37% according to CMI, at a time when the unemployment rate was increasing. That means what we were seeing increasingly was a discouraged worker phenomenon, the NEET phenomenon, not in education, employment, or training. That number today stands at over 100 million young people, rising every year. Look at the rate of open unemployment, which tripled, as I just told you, from 2012 to 2018, then rose in COVID, although falling slightly thereafter. I want you to sort of dwell a little bit, because this is these are unemployment rates for youth by level of education. I don't know whether you can see, starting to the left, you've got illiterate workers, primary, secondary, higher, graduates. For a moment, I'll just dwell on the graduates, because all of you are working to be graduates, and I'll look at postgraduates. Graduates, those numbers start at 2012 and then go on all the way to 22. Look at the tripling that I just talked about. Graduate unemployment in 2012 was 20%, it rose to 35%. It has slightly fallen since then. Postgraduate unemployment was 18% in 2012, it went to 37%. Formal vocational education, those who got formal, I'll come back to this, 14% to 26%, near doubling at the same time that Skill India was being talked about endlessly. Technical education, those were technical 3D. It went from 18% to 38%. It just breaks your heart. If this doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does, what will. Yet the disinformation spread by government economists about joblessness is endless. The first claim, they're trashing the CMI data. Despite CMI having a larger sample size than NSO, covering organized and the unorganized sectors, rural as well as urban. It's not just that. There is another claim by people like Professor Ramesh Chand and recently repeated by others, that NSO's PLFS since 1718 is not comparable to NSO's labor force surveys of 11, 12 and before, and earlier rounds, despite the fact that the NSO's annual report of 1718 compares the 1718 PLFS to the earlier rounds. So what are they talking about? What are they talking about? There's a third claim by the likes of Surjit Bhalla, Arvind Viramani, and Mr. Panagaria. 1718 to 22 NSO PLFS shows unemployment rate is falling, LFPR and WPR is rising. Is it? Let's look at the reality. The fact of the matter is that in the CMI data, that is not what's happening. The exact opposite is happening. Because PLFS data is not internationally compliant, is not using internationally compliant definitions. CMI is. I was a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics at the request of this government from 2020 to 2022. We kept making an argument to them, kindly do at least pilot surveys using the 19th ICLS design and schedule of the ILO. 100 countries of the world are using the 19th ICLS. We have refused to do so. Although in the year that ILFS conference, sorry, the ICLS conference took place, we were the chair of that conference, and yet we refused to implement it in our PLFS, which is a new design 2017-18. Can you believe that? I cannot, certainly. And the fact of the matter is that the PLFS data is showing a rising LFPR, rising WPR, falling unemployment rate, which is what the Virmanis of the world are riding upon. It is rising because unpaid family labor has increased by a solid 50 million in the last 7 or 8 years. Unpaid family labor is not counted by the ILO in its definition. CMI is internationally compliant. They don't count it. That's why their data is saying WPR is rising, sorry, falling. LFPR is falling. Unemployment is rising. PLF is showing the opposite. That's how they, you know, 56 इंच की छाती ये बताती है आपको कि unemployment rate 3.1% है और गिर रहा है. हर साल गिर रहा है. Moving on. Yeah, I've taken 15. I'm going to take another 5. 20 minutes? That's what we agreed. Because even if I take 20, you'll still have 40 minutes for discussion. Okay. I'll move on in the interest of time. I'll move on because there's much more disinformation that I could tell you, but I won't. I won't even talk about the structural nature of the economic crisis, because this problem with the job creation potential of the economy is essentially on account of the structural nature of the crisis. If you ask me questions, I will answer that. So I will move on. I want to prove to you it's not just that non-farm jobs are not growing, but they were growing when the non-farm jobs were growing at a rate of 7.5 million per annum, which fell to about 2.9 million per annum after this government came to power. Look at the data here. From 2004 to 11-12, the regular salaried wages, rural or urban is rising. For casual workers, rural or urban, it is rising. But it begins to stagnate or fall after 12. Moving on. Looking at 17 to 22. This is agriculture, self-employed earnings, casual worker wages, all showing flat. Moving on. Manufacturing, same. Self-employed, regular, casual, all flat in the last 6 years. Non-manufacturing, which is mainly construction, all flat. Services, all flat in terms of wages, which is what Madhura was talking about in the morning. And if you don't want to believe the UFL date that I just mentioned, it's all in here. It's going to be published in my my book, which is just finished. In the interest of time, I will move on. I will not elaborate on this. I just want to dwell on the following fact, that a structural change has been reversed. But given that I'm running out of time, I won't even show that. Let me quickly, in the interest of time, walk you through what are the policies, what could be done, which is not being done, which could all be done. I hope it might be done now, because there is a government which is perhaps might begin to listen. What could be done? For 30 years since our economic reforms began, we should have and have not had an industrial policy, and still don't, because PLI is not industrial policy, Make in India is not industrial policy. I have a feeling I might not be able to dwell on even on any of this. So I'm going to just sort of ask you to read some of the stuff I've written. Just go to Muckrack. You can Google me, you'll find that stuff, or find my book, Cambridge University Press 2020. It has chapters on this. But let me turn to women in the last 5 minutes, if I might, because my last 5 slides are essentially about if we want to ensure that female labor force participation rates begin to look at least respectable and look and rise above the levels at which they are, which they are at Yemeni and Saudi Arabian levels, as we were told in the morning. Firstly, we need better childcare, affordable working hostels in towns. We need free public transportation within cities. I could elaborate on this, but I won't, because I deal with it in my published work. We need to strengthen social services. Shiv talked about it, Poonam talked about it, as did others, that if we strengthen our public social services where women predominate, it'll be good for jobs, it'll be good for public service delivery in health and education, and it will actually improve the nature of governance if we had more policemen, we had more judiciary, we had more doctors, nurses, teachers in universities as well. I could move on. I could develop this, but I won't. Last three, bullets, transforming agriculture from low to high end. Let's just remember that our girls are much better educated, but our adult women are much more poorly educated. And they're the ones who've been leaving agriculture. They're the ones who dominated agriculture. They've had to re-enter agriculture, unfortunately, in the last 6 or 7 years. But they're still in low-end agriculture. They're not in high-end agriculture. They were losing work earlier because of mechanization. Now, women can also be taught to use the implements, the equipment that are part of the mechanization process. These adult women, it could be done by the SHGs. All of this can be done within the SHG and the other mechanisms. Animal husbandry schemes need to be revived with milk breeding, cow rearing by small and margin farmers and Gujarat-style cooperative movements. Modernize and expanding the role of SHGs. I could talk about that, won't have the time. So my last slide is about encouraging women's entrepreneurship. Only 8 million women, which is under 14% of Indian enterprises, are owned by women. That's data from the 6th Economic Census. The government has not released more recent data, although they are actually sitting upon it. And 82% of these are micro units as sole proprietors and as own account units. Own account units are the weakest, have the lowest productivity, and therefore the lowest earnings. 6.3 million of the 8 million are without hired workers, micro units as petty shops, fruit and vegetable vendor, repair shops, dairy, and poultry. These cannot help to make women self-dependent or self-reliant. Food and education are two top sectors for the urban women, expected to become an 8,000 crore GVA and 300 crore GVA by 2025. These are areas that could be supported. High potential ideas in the food area, home snacks production, cloud-based kitchens, organic food, artisan food, ready-to-cook foods. Education, the other sector, which I call two top sectors, EdTech-enabled home tutoring, scaling independent daycares, franchise model for competitive exam tutoring, and so on. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Santosh. So you've heard three panelists address different dimensions of the demographic dividend, or if you like, some of the challenges as well as to how to make that demographic dividend productive. And they spoke to the urgency. Looks like we have till 2042, if I heard it right, or thereabouts. But let me now open up the floor for questions. Who would like to start? We have one over there. We have Ratin here. Start with the lady at the back. If I might ask the panelists to make a note of the questions, then we'll come back and have a round of response. Go ahead. You might identify yourself. And
Yes, I'm Kopal. So thank you, panelists, for your insightful discussion. The amount of knowledge that I've been receiving since morning is overwhelming. And I have a question towards Poonam ma'am, and it's regarding the BCC campaigns that you discuss as one of the approaches in awareness building measures. So ma'am, especially in rural context, so as we saw in Swachh Bharat Gramin, how community-led total sanitation and BCC, IEC approaches have been deployed dominantly in the implementation of the program, and so much so that 8% of the project expenditure went into that. And So my question is on the role of the state, especially when it ends up perpetuating patriarchal norms during the campaigns, especially when we talk about wall murals. So wall murals is one of the very important instrument in rural areas for everyday awareness building. And again, like one of the observations I had in rural Shravasti, that it's regarding an advertisement regarding female PT site. So it read on the wall of the school that if you want to save the girl, if you want round chapatis, please save the girl child. So I would just like to know that, do they, like, is there any critical review that undergo behind such regressive notions or messages that is implemented by the government and the government the district coordinators, etc., the machinery, etc., on the ground? So how do we like see this, and how can the damage be reversed?
Gonna make a note of that. We'll come around. Next, Ratin. Here.
So I have two questions
Please.
actually for the whole panel, because one is a puzzle, right, which I need to understand, and I think,
And you're asking the whole panel, right?
yeah, anyone in the panel, because, okay, if you look at this Piketty thing, World Inequality Database, and you look at the data that is presented, it shows that is this better?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah. But you're talking about Piketty's
The
work.
World
yeah?
Inequality Database. So there you will find that as opposed to 2014, 2019, between 2019 and 2022, the fastest growth in annual real income in India occurred in the top 10%, not the top 1%. If that happened, I'd like to know exactly how they were earning this income, because in India, as you all know, the top 10% are not South Delhi people. I mean, so they do jobs. They are small businessmen. They tend to be graduates and postgraduates. And Santosh's data, which is very emphatic and very accurate, shows that, in fact, this is exactly the place where employment is not happening. So how does one reconcile this paradox of, at one level, they're saying that this was the fastest rate of income growth, the top 10%, but that is not where that's not being borne out with the employment numbers. And this is not, Niti Aayog or Amitabh Kant or something. This is the Piketty database. That is one question I had. The second is a political proposition I'm going to ask you. So I have been saying, your party did pick it up, that one of the other signs of distress in India, which resonates with regional inequality, is migration. By the way, if Drs. Pandey and Dr. Mehrotra are right, my advice to young people would be get the hell out of this country fast, as fast as you can. Because, but people are getting the hell out of UP. Who would blame them? It's a horrible place. It's poorer than Nepal, or Bihar, right? And they're going where? They are going to Kerala and Tamil Nadu, because that's the per capita income of Indonesia. This level of migration also reflects a structural inequality. I'm referring back to what I said in the morning, that there are five, that I have this slogan in Hindi, which I hope will be picked up this time. Jahan ghar, wahi naukri. Contrary to all this highfalutin nonsense about, let's have some special economic zones, or let people go off to the peninsula in large trains. Why don't we create jobs where people are? Now the question comes, how do you do that? And I have identified 5 sectors where this can be done, which are job-full sectors and where AI will not come and where you will not hear stupid words like unicorn and all that. Agriculture, food, livestock, all the things Madhura spoke about. Those jobs are where you live, right? Textiles. Textiles for the rich are produced in the South, but the South wage rates are too high to compete with Bangladesh and Vietnam. As even the PIB person from Niti Aayog, the economist from Niti Aayog in the morning was saying. But Gorakhpur is competitive with Vietnam. So why don't we produce shirts where the people of Gorakhpur live? There is no skills problem, because I've seen those guys. I'm from Maharashtra. They run my shop floor. Those are the workers, all this, Pandey Mishra, they know how to make diamonds. They know how to make gold. They know how to cut gold. They know how to run machines. They're a highly skilled manufacturing workforce. Housing by definition has to be built where people live, because people buy housing where they live. That's why they live there. Education has to be provided where people live. and health where people live. So why aren't these 5 sectors jobful sectors? These are also potentially feminized sectors. Would you agree with me, or am I missing something? Thank you.
One more from Subaran, and then we will have the panel respond, and we'll take another round after that. So
Yes.
prepare your questions.
So Professor Santosh, this is a question for you. So will it be correct to say that we are sitting on a demographic time bomb, given the picture which we have given? Because without any, skill, upgradation of skill or any scope of job, probably it's going to hurt us more rather than making it a gaga case for that. We have a demographic dividend. And I have already mentioned that it started in around 1980 and we are almost at the end of the movie, if I want to say it like that, where like almost the climax is here. So that's my first question, your take on that. And the second one is that in the manufacturing sector, you showed us that there has been a significant drop in the employment. So what was happening during that time? If we are to believe that the Make in India or the story was going on, then why in the manufacturing sector there was a drop in the unemployment? Thank you.
All right. If we don't have, all right, let's take one more and then we'll go to the panelists.
Good afternoon. I am Bhavna. I am doing PhD from CSRD Jawaharlal Nehru University. My question is from Santosh sir. I am not an expert, sir, in this field, but I would like to know your views about today's youth finding a lot of jobs in the gig economy. And basically, we are also motivating women to go there. And we absolutely have no job security there, poor working conditions, etc. And how sustainable is that? Or is it just a boom which might end up going in some other direction? Or what is the way forward towards that? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Let's get some brief responses from the panelists, starting with Poonam, and then we'll hopefully have time for one more round. Poonam, please. Please, use the mic.
Thanks for
Just this button on top, I think.
Namaste, Pooja. Thanks for asking some very important questions, which are so relevant, especially as far as gender equality or inequality is concerned. So let me first talk about behavior change that you asked a question on. There's global evidence and evidence in India. A lot of programs, behavior change programs, fortunately have been evaluated, not just in India, but internationally, much more. And, we were practicing this IAC poster slogan, Modi ji ke bhi slogan nahi kaam kiye, to in social issues pe in a rigorous, in a society that's so patriarchal, and I would say we are not just pro men or pro boys, we are anti-female. So in a situation like this, much progress has been made using entertainment, education, using different strategies for behavior change, which we now know posters and parchis and all didn't work. So as far as, yes, they used a lot of attention they gave during Swachh Bharat for open defecation and other issues to using behavior change, changing social norms. And we did quite well. And part of the 8% of that budget, I made a 25-part serial on Doordarshan where we worked on women's empowerment. And there was a lot of impact, and the evaluations are there for you to see. And as far as, the ads about feticide, forget some district in one of the most backward districts in UP coming out with the ad that you talked about. Look at what's happening to India and the impact these very regressive soaps. If you see, every woman family today watches soap. And one day I was working on a chapter for a book, which I couldn't do because I couldn't watch those damn episodes. After surfing through 4 or 5 television, different colors, and other channels, I came to conclusion, three broad conclusions I came to, and I didn't complete reviewing them to do the article for the book. Now I want to do a book, not just a chapter in a book. First, women dress up from head to toe and have nowhere to go except the kitchen. Second, women are shown, working women are shown as women with one foot in their male colleague's bed. Third, women spend all their time scheming, the mother-in-law scheming how to screw the daughter-in-law and vice versa, and so on and so forth. And, you know, when we did some research for Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, this serial that we made, we went to get feedback. Groups of women across the country said their family life had got worsened with this mother-in-law, daughter-in-law role that was being shown. And the girls had a tough time going out for employment, out of the house. I have to say that this is, I mean, ultimately I concluded they're showing women as nagins. So a lot of the fact that even though girls and women's aspirations I talked about have changed, but the regressive social norms, the toxic masculinity that you see in this country is a result of a lot of, whether it's in campaigns, what they say about women, and outside in the soaps and so on and so forth. And I think we have to do very serious work in this country on changing social norms, and we know how to do it. You know, and when I say we know how to do it, I can give many examples from Bollywood to our own serial to other programs that have happened across the country. Young people are watching not even news. Even if they watch news, it's on the net. But they're watching, you know, an unknown organization like Population Foundation of India, for one episode on, let's say, we did one, the highest hits came on, we did something called Sex Ki Adalat. We did 5 different programs, and each of them got from 10 million to 20 million hits, but we were dealing with very issues like sex selection. We were dealing with issues like you know, a whole lot of issues that you can't deal with in schools and with young people or on normal channels. And finally, I want to say that as far as jobs are concerned, you know, you said they should go, you turned around and said people should go out of India. People will. Look at the true trajectories that's happening globally. There are countries that don't have a working age population. The biggest worry for Japan, so many other countries, is getting working age people. And India is going to be, has been, and will be a country where people, young people or other people are going to go away. Capital will, human capital will fly faster than capital comes into India. And so we should have our act together that we don't have a brain drain. We get those countries, we plan for it. We have large number of young population. We invest in, we get them to invest in education as well as skilling. Japan has done a contract with India recently, I believe. We need to do that wide scale because our young people, we are going to have a total brain drain. And it is also an opportunity. I am not being critical, but I think there are huge opportunities for Indians across the world, and Indians do better, often better outside than here. And finally, I want to say that I just want to add to the 5, I don't know who said 5 areas in the rural areas we can invest in. And I want to remind us, we have totally forgotten artisans. We have skilled artisans. We have thousands of skills in India. China, with less than 50 skills, has overtaken the global market, has been for a long time. And that's an area we need to invest in, not skilling, but on marketing, on infrastructure, finance, and so on. And now artisans have the great opportunity, thanks to digital economy, to work. And the women can make the shirts too, by the way.
Now, do you want to add something before I go to Santoor?
You said the man get me.
Oh, y'all kind of get me sleepy. Is it fixing?
Thank you so much. And I'll just add to the question that you have asked, sir. And like, I totally relate to that. A lot of young people are not only young people, young women, young people are actually getting interested into non-traditional sectors, like not limiting themselves to like rural areas or urban areas. There have been like few schemes also, like, but they are not getting that kind of a like platform to actually showcase the skills that they have got. Like if you consider an example of UP, there is the one district, one product program, but I'm not getting into the success or failure of that particular program, but the at least artists are getting platforms to actually showcase those things. So and it is also important for the state government, the local government to support those kind of uh, sectors that they have within their own states. This is something that they can also take up in terms of having like communication with the central government, how these sectors can also be promoted. But as also mentioned by some of the, I think one of the panelists in the last panel, that I think this one only, Santosh sir mentioned about having an industrial policy, which has been like missing. So that is something we need to consider very strongly, because we do have a very huge potential of young people and women in these sectors. So yeah, just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, and thank you very much indeed for all those excellent questions, Rasmi. Let me start by responding to Ratin. Regional inequality, Ratin, of course, goes to the heart of the matter. And regional inequality goes to the heart of the development crisis in our country. This structural inequality was limited until 1991. It has become much worse, as I show in a chapter in the book, India Out of Work, with Bloomsbury just about to emerge. We demonstrate this, specifically for a 30-year period from 1992 to 2019. And some of this is discussed in an EPW paper in 2021. And you identify the problem rightly, Ratin. So you're spot on that we need to generate urban employment through urban infrastructure and urban real estate. One way of doing it is through public investments comparable to an urban Manrega. It'll actually reduce the expenditure on rural Manrega because it'll be substitutive. I've been making this case since 2020 to the government. Who cares? No one listens. 3 states have already implemented this. But going beyond that, let's look at the 5 manufacturing sectors that account for 50% of total manufacturing employment in our which account for 50% of total manufacturing employment in our country. What are those 5 sectors? You're spot on: textiles, garments, leather and footwear, wood furniture, and food processing. And interestingly enough, it is precisely these sectors which saw a massive absolute decline in employment since this government came to power. Why should we be surprised? Leather and footwear took a kick in the backside thanks to the cow trade, the attack on the cow trade. Beef exports, another major export and very labor-intensive activity, took a massive hit. Which brings me back to my labor-intensive manufacturing strategy, which is part of a broader industrial strategy, which has to be a horizontal industrial strategy, not a vertical industrial strategy, unlike the PLI, which is what this government has adopted. I mean, the PLI is the exact opposite of the kind of industrial policy this country needs. You won't believe, of the 14 PLI sectors, 12 of them are capital intensive. What we need is jobs in the labor intensive sectors. They didn't select any one of them. Interestingly, The Congress manifesto actually speaks precisely about a PLI for the labor-intensive sector. I would push, had they come to power, I would push them much harder, in fact, in that direction, because there are cross-sectoral policies that they could have adopted. Secondly, I'd go very strongly with Poonam's idea. You know, in this country, most of the manufacturing output and employment is in 5,500 clusters spread across the whole country. About 1,500 of these clusters are modern industry clusters. Then about 4,000 of them are handloom, handicraft, and other traditional artisanal products. It's not that India doesn't have a cluster development approach. All late industrializers like Italy, northern Italy, like China, had a cluster development policy. We started ours only in 2005. We came late, and we still don't invest enough. You won't believe this. The MSME ministry and the textile ministry are the two ministries which are mostly responsible for our CDP. Between them, they don't spend more than 1,000 crores per annum for 5,500 clusters. तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि आप 50 लाख एक क्लस्टर पे आप पुताई करवा सकते हैं एक बिल्डिंग में, उससे अधिक नहीं कर सकते. Jabki all kinds of support are needed, which I could talk about, which I do talk about in a Indian Journal of Labor Economics paper about 3 years ago, which is also developed in a longer version in my CUP book of 2020. The important point that I think our policymakers do not realize and will not ever speak about, will only speak about PLI and speak about Make in India in a sort of loose sort of manner, is they don't want to recognize, and this sort of attempts to answer another question that was raised by you, sir. You see, when in 2016 a demand was introduced, that was the first shock, a policy-induced shock to the economy. 6 months later, another policy-induced shock to the economy, a badly planned and badly designed and implemented GST. The unorganized sector, the MSMEs, were reeling under the shock of the demonetization, and they were delivered yet another policy-induced shock. Why do I call these policy-induced shock? Let's just recall that a comparison is constantly made by, oh, we also then suffered COVID. Yes, but no one told you to implement at 4 hours notice a national lockdown. China did not do so. South Africa did not do so. Who asked you to do it in a country of 1.4 billion people? And you stopped all economic activity at 4 hours notice. And the economy, which was already slowing down, went into reverse. The contraction of the economy in FY21 was twice as much as the global economy contraction of 3.1%. If jobs are not growing, if manufacturing fell, these are the reasons why. You see, let's just remember that the global economic crisis was not brought upon us by policy. We induced 3 shocks to our economy. That's what has resulted in all of this. And unfortunately, if we have this government back continuing, we will have some more shocks being delivered without any rationale. So that's the reason why absolute number of jobs went from 60 million to 55 million. They've only just climbed back up to about 60 million. That means in a 10-year period, we've had a sort of hiatus in terms of manufacturing jobs. In other words, when workers would have been pulled out of agriculture, you had the opposite happening. We were asked the question, CSRD, from CSRD gig economy. Yes, part-time work, very important. It's an alternative. In the absence of regular work, which is the share of which has been shrinking, this is what is growing. What is gig economy? It is self-employment. Self-employment was 7 years ago, 52% of the share of total employment. It has gone to 58%. That's what this government wants. Pakoda. Make pakoda. That's a job. Even if you take 200 rupees at the end of the day. If I was to talk to you about real wages, 62% of our workers on a daily wage earn less than 200 rupees a day, ma'am. Now, how are you supposed to make a living for if you have 5 people? Look, 91% of our workforce is informal. Gig economy work is also informal. I have a whole paper on this subject, which is up on the website of the University of Bath. It's also been published in the Journal of Asian Pacific Economy. How can this country provide social insurance for 91% of our informal workers? We don't have to have employer-employee relationships. We can actually have a whole calibrated system which will ensure coverage of all 90%. Then all this hankering for sarkari job will actually dissipate, because you didn't have this hankering for sarkari jobs till about 10 years ago. Anyway, I could go on, but I don't have the time.
Let me begin to wrap it up. I'll just ask one question to each of the panelists, and if they can just give us maybe a 1 or 2 minute answer. So, Poonam, is there a state or 2 or 3 states that are beginning to show progressive policies in capitalizing on the demographic dividend? And if there are, could you mention what they're doing to us so that we hear a little bit about some progressive action on the policy front utilizing the demographic dividend? So to Abhinav, question is, what do you see as the responsibility of youth themselves? So it's one thing to talk about the needs of youth and what the government should do, but we need to hear about what the youth themselves should be doing. You know, what kind of demands is one thing, but what actions are they taking in order that self-empowerment might happen and that they might proceed? The debate, of course, rages on job makers and job takers. And maybe they should be thinking a bit more of becoming job makers, no? So I like to hear that from you. And from Santosh, if you had the opportunity to help the new government define a few priorities for the first 100 days, what would be the top 3? So
the bad news. I don't know any state in India that is working on investing in young people where you could say they're exemplar or have done anything. Yes, I would say Delhi, the Delhi government in terms of education, great improvements, but skilling, same. But good education will lead to absorption and so on of better skills. But the place where I can say there's something being done for aging, which we didn't talk enough about in terms of the demographic changes, I would say Kerala has begun. Kerala has begun to invest in the health through various innovative approaches for looking after the health of the elderly. I think this is an area for research where we may not be able to find, I'm talking about the demographic dividend, where we may not be able to find a state which has done exceptionally well in all aspects. You know, they need their mental well-being, sexual reproductive health, health in general, and education, and then comes skilling. I haven't seen any state do well, but having said that, there is enough evidence globally for us to learn from.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I do believe, and like when it comes to realizing the rights of young people, it is also important to realize the responsibilities that they have in the country. And in some capacity, it is the responsibility of young people to actually, to know that this is a phase that is going on, and they have to like leverage those opportunities that they have in terms of building their own leadership, supporting the other young people in their own capacity. And it is not only to deal with how to like create employment for others, but it also in terms of supporting the other individuals in their own like in their own life. So apart from that, there are a lot of spaces where young people should actually promote themselves to actually facilitate these conversations with them, whether supporting the local government, supporting the state government on different aspects of the programs, because ultimately it is the nation that matters, and we have to like go in alignment with all the other programs that we have. It is not limited to one particular program or the other schemes of the government, but also to create those avenues. And it is something that young people will definitely ensure. And this is something we also include in our leadership modules that we have. Like we also facilitate those conversations with them in order to like make them realize, okay, these are the rights of youth that we have in the country, but at the same time, these are also the responsibility that you should also practice. So all these two things like go hand in hand, and there is no sort of like a gap between them. So yeah.
One more statement, and that is that I do see in the Congress manifesto the opportunity and potential for the apprenticeship opportunity. I think that's a great one. And okay, I had a second.
All right, let's hear about the new government.
Thank you very much. Actually, thank you, Poonam, for reminding me about the right to apprenticeship. I actually suggested to the Congress Party, and I was delighted when they picked it up. Actually, they picked it up. It was welcomed, and they put it in there. And in fact, one of the reasons why I believe that the Prime Minister was so rattled by the manifesto, and he tried to turn the attention away of the nation towards Muslim and Mangal Sutra and Bhains Le Jayenge, is precisely because when he started talking about the manifesto and calling it a Muslim-oriented manifesto, the young of the country actually downloaded that very day 8.8 million copies of that manifesto. Their site crashed. It tells you how much it was welcomed, that their manifesto and the right to apprenticeship. The right to apprenticeship is something rather easy to implement. I mean, the skills space is something I've been working on for 10 years, even since I was in the Planning Commission. And there is a 1961 Act. All you need to do is actually really put it to implementation. I can't elaborate on this for shortage of time. But the more important point, I think, Naresh, in response to the question you had, कि क्या करना है अगले 100 दिन में, क्या किया जा सकता है? You see, not that this government is listening to anyone like us. The real issue is that the country's skill development program needs a complete overhaul and revamp. In what way? In one big way. And that's the following. And the right to apprenticeship is a small part of it. It is that and this is a problem with the previous government's skill development strategy as well. And unfortunately, we weren't around long enough to actually implement it properly. Never mind that the more important is Skill India has neither any vision nor a strategy. They have something called the PMKVY. That's the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. They've had one phase of it, PMKVY 1, 2, 3, now they have 4. And what is PMKVY? They give money through the NSDC to 6,000 private providers of vocational training, private providers of vocational training, not companies that provide training. Now, what is the problem with that? You have been hearing all day today about the poor quality of general academic education that our young go through. We come out with half-educated young people after secondary or higher secondary, and you want to skill them in 3 months? That's what the NSDC does in their VTPs. In other words, half-educated young people being quarter-skilled. Obviously, most of them end up in the informal sector. That's exactly what is happening. And this is happening because our skill development, Skill India mission is government-driven, government-financed, and government-managed. In the countries of the world which have been successful on their TVET strategies, they've not only had it alongside an industrial policy. We have neither an industrial policy nor do we have a proper TVET policy. The TVET policy is actually driven by the industry, by the employers. It is demand driven, not supply driven. And it is demand driven because it is employer driven and it is financed. And Germany is the classic example. 84% of total cost of the TVET system in Germany is met by the private sector, only 16% by the government. And that's what, and part of the Germanic model is this right to apprenticeship. Not a right, but I mean, we are introducing a right, but apprenticeship. It's central to it. And finally, finally, in response to a very important question, which I forgot to answer of Ratin's about 10% versus 1%. And yes, of course, the 1%, their wealth and incomes have risen, but so have those of the 10%, as you rightly noted. Now, my tentative response on that, my tentative answer to that is the following, that look, what we've had, Ratin, is a K-shaped recovery. It's not been a V-shaped recovery. Part of that K-shaped recovery is precisely the fact that the organized sector was least impacted by COVID and the unorganized sector was most impacted, which was already reeling from double shocks of COVID, from demonetization and GST. Now, the thing is that what happened was that as sort of people were thrown out of work in 2020 and early 2020 in the organized sector, many of them, and even those who were joining the labor force, the young, they were at least in that class where they could enter the stock market with whatever savings they had. 2 million young retailers were joining the stock market each month. Their earnings were growing, and that's part of that phenomenon. The unorganized sector has not recovered. All the data seems to point in that direction. We would have loved to have harder data on that, but that will happen only when the unorganized enterprises survey data for 1920, 2021, 21, 22, and 22, 23 was released, but this government doesn't want to release data. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks very much to the panel, and thanks audience for being patient and engaging as well. So that brings us to the end of this panel. There are a little bit of formalities that we need to do, and then we will go for physiological break. You will do the honor. Start with Punam. Yeah. All right. Hold on, we can't do two at a time, so we can get a camera. Punam, thank you so much. All right. From here now, we know I'm happy with the fact. That's great. Thanks. Thanks very much. Thank you, sir.
बंद तो कर दिया आपने